A guest disappears without a trace. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I am your host, Enigma. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your messages truly make my day. Let's continue. If there is any hour of the day when the brownstone is less a house than a temple, it's the hour between the soup and the roast. That sounds like something Wolfe might say, but with him, it wouldn't be a metaphor. It would be a grievance. The dining room on West 35th Street is the only place in New York where a man can inhale a souffle as if it were a doctrine and look offended that the universe had ever tried to interrupt him. So naturally, the doorbell rang. Not once, not a neighborly ding that could be an accident or a messenger who came early. It rang in the way a doorbell rings when somebody is determined to be let in or to die on the stoop trying. Fritz Brenner had just set down the soup tureen with the solemnity of a priest presenting communion. Wolfe had lowered his napkin a hair in that private little signal that the course had met his standards. I had one spoonful in my mouth when the bell erupted. Wolfe did not flinch. He never does. It's one of those things about him that could irritate a saint, the conviction that the world is obliged to wait while he lives in it. But his eyes slid to me, braided with mild annoyance, and he said, "Archie." I swallowed, stood, and said what I always say. Sure, I didn't need dinner anyway. I went through the hall and opened the front door with the practiced neutrality of a bouncer at a very polite nightclub. On the step stood a woman in a grey coat and an attitude that looked as if it had been ironed into her. Tall, narrow, early 30s maybe. Hair pinned back like she meant business with gravity. She held no suitcase, no umbrella, no flowers, no excuse. She had a leather folder in one hand and a look in her eyes that had already gotten past the stage of asking permission. "You're Archie Goodwin," she said. Not a question. "That depends. Who's asking?" "Celeste Varin." She said it like I should have been honored. I wasn't. "I need to see Nero Wolfe, now." "Miss Varin, it's 6:45. Mr. Wolfe is eating." She glanced past me into the hall as if she could smell Fritz's soup. I know his schedule. That bothered me a little. People who know Wolfe's schedule are either old clients, old enemies, or newspaper readers with too much time. This lady didn't look like any of those. She looked like a person who had read the world's fine print and decided it didn't apply to her. "You can need all you want," I said. "The schedule is the schedule. If you've got a bleeding artery, we'll call an ambulance. Otherwise—" She opened the leather folder to display a card. It wasn't a business card. It was an invitation on thick cream stock with a crest I didn't recognize. Under it, clipped neatly, was a small chain with a charm on it. A gold orchid, about the size of a dime, the petals detailed enough to make Fritz jealous. Wolfe came into the hall behind me without a sound, which always means the bell has made it into his bloodstream. If he was content, he'd have let me handle her and waited at the table. If he was curious, he would drift. If he was annoyed but interested enough to cover it, he would appear like a bear in evening clothes. He wore the bear look now. Napkin tucked under his chin, eyes coldly attentive. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, stepping forward before I could block it. "I apologize for interrupting your dinner. I assure you it is unavoidable." Wolfe's mouth made a motion that was not a smile. "Madame, interruptions are by definition avoidable. They are only unavoidable to those without manners. Mr. Goodwin, shall I return to my soup?" "Maybe not just yet," I said, because I'd caught the little gold orchid's hook. Wolfe's orchids are his religion, and any stranger bringing one to the door between courses meant either a bribe or a bomb. Wolfe looked at the charm. His eyes narrowed the way they do when he sees an unfamiliar hybrid. "Where did you acquire that?" he asked. "It was given to me," she said, "by your oldest living enemy, your best living friend, or by a man who is both. Choose the label you like." Wolfe blinked once. Slow. That is practically a gasp for him. He removed the napkin with a deliberate gesture, handed it to me and said, "Bring the lady to the office. Fritz will keep the dinner warm." He didn't ask me to take the soup away. That's how I knew the charm had struck true. I led her down the corridor, past the dining room, into the office. Wolfe followed at his own speed, which is to say glacial but dignified. She sat in the red leather chair without being told, crossed her legs like she had appointed herself county judge, and waited. Wolfe settled behind the desk as if it had been designed to cradle him alone, which in a way it had. He folded his hands over his stomach. I took my chair at the side table, notepad ready because I'm a clerk in a one-man court. "Now," Wolfe said, "who are you, and why are you disturbing my household?" "Celeste Varin," she repeated, "executive director of the Hartswick Foundation. If you run around in New York long enough, you start collecting names the way Fritz collects spices. The Hartswick Foundation was one I knew. Heavy money, quiet influence, scholarship endowments, museum wings. Not flashy, more like a hand that moves pieces without bothering to show itself." "And thee," she said, placing the invitation and the gold orchid on Wolfe's desk. "Item you're holding is yours." "It resembles my property," Wolfe said. "It is." She tapped the charm with a finger that didn't tremble. "Mr. Wolfe, last night your orchid show at the Botanic Gardens raised $35,000 for children's lung clinics. You were the only donor who gave a token rather than a check. That token belonged to a man named Luther Hartswick." I saw it now. Luther Hartswick was a name I'd heard from distantly rich people and from columns about philanthropy. Old man, brass-bound fortune, widower, and a collector of everything including rivals. Wolfe's expression stayed neutral, which meant he was intrigued enough to choke down his irritation. "The token was presented to me by Mr. Hartswick at the reception." "Yes." Her chin lifted a fraction. "And after dessert, Mr. Hartswick vanished." It takes a lot to make silence in that office feel like it has weight. The woman's sentence did it. Wolfe looked at her with an extra degree of attention, like a man who has just been told the wine cellar is flooding. "Vanished," he repeated. "Left the reception hall with his plate cleared and his coffee half finished. He did not return to his seat. He did not go to the coat room. He did not leave by any door under security camera coverage. He did not answer his phone. He has not been seen since. That is a matter for the police." "The police will be involved," she said. "But they will do what police do. They will assume abduction. They will look for ransom. They will panic the trustees and the press. Mr. Hartswick would not have wanted that." Wolfe's eyes went cold. "A dead man's preferences are irrelevant." "We don't know he's dead." Wolfe gave her a look that said he had no patience for optimism when it steps on logic. "Then his preferences are irrelevant on principle." She met the look. "You knew him, Mr. Wolfe." "I met him yesterday." "You met him 4 times over 20 years. You declined his offers twice. You accepted his orchid charm last night. You were the last person he spoke to alone." That little line wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was a fact delivered in a way that tried to make it my employer's responsibility. I watched Wolfe's hands. When he's indifferent, his fingers rest like fat commas. When he's annoyed but listening, they press together. When he's engaged, they separate, the pads of his fingers touching as if he is sculpting the air. He was sculpting now. "You have done your homework," he said. "I had to." "You say he vanished after dessert. At what precise time?" 8:53, she said without blinking. "We have the seating chart and the service timeline. Dessert was plated at 8:41. Coffee poured at 8:49. He rose at 8:53. The waiter assumed he was going to the men's room. He never came back. And the last person he spoke to alone was myself." "When?" 8:30. You were in the conservatory corridor outside the reception hall. 2 people saw you enter that corridor with him. One of them is a botanist with no interest in foundation politics, and the other is an investment lawyer with no time for gossip. Both are credible. Neither heard what you discussed. I do not accept your inference that this makes me responsible. I'm not inferring responsibility. I'm stating position. You are in the center of this, whether you like it or not. Wolfe leaned back a fraction. The chair, a masterpiece of tolerance, took the load. What did Mr. Hartswick say to me, madam? Her eyes narrowed. I don't know. Then your homework is incomplete. She took a breath. It might have been impatience, or it might have been nerves. If it was nerves, she was a champion at hiding them. Did he approach you with a request? She asked, because if he did, it is likely connected. He didn't answer, which meant I didn't either. Wolfe doesn't share his cards while the deal is still in his hands. She pressed on. Mr. Hartswick was scheduled to meet with the trustees this morning. The meeting concerned a major restructuring of the foundation, a new endowment, new appointments, a shift in control. There are people who would benefit from his absence, and people who would fear it. Yes. Name them. She raised her eyebrows. Not yet. I came to hire you, not to indict half our board from your dining room. That got a tick from Wolfe's upper lip. He doesn't like being managed. Still, I could see he was listening with that refined, predatory attention he saves for chess and human folly. You came to hire me, he said. On what terms? $5,000 retainer, commensurate with your standard fee. She opened the folder and slid a check across the desk like a poker chip. Expenses covered. Discretion assured. Your findings delivered to me and to Mr. Hartswick if he is alive, and if he is dead. Then to me and to the trustees, with your recommendation for how to proceed. Wolfe looked at the check without touching it. You presume too much. I have not agreed to take your case. You will, she said quietly, because you already have. That was either audacity or knowledge, a bright red flag either way. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Explain. You accepted the orchid charm. That wasn't a donation. It was a signal. He told me, before he left his house yesterday, that if he gave you that token and didn't come home, you were to be asked for help. Wolfe didn't move. But I saw the tiniest change in his breathing, the kind of subtle intake he'd deny under oath. She went on. He said you would grumble. You would posture, you would insist you didn't care, but that if a situation offended your sense of order, you would work it out. He said it wouldn't be for money. It would be because you do not tolerate a puzzle that steps into your living room and tracks mud on the rug. I got a grin I couldn't help. That was Luther Hartswick talking, all right. He'd pegged Wolfe like a specimen. Wolfe's voice was mild. Did he say why he anticipated needing me? Yes. He said he was going to make enemies at dessert. What a charming man. Not charming, she said. Strategic. There was a pause where the city outside sounded far away. The brownstone is like that. It can make Manhattan feel like an aquarium beyond thick glass. Wolfe said, What is your relationship to Mr. Hartswick? I work for his foundation. That is not a relationship. She looked at him for a beat too long. I was his protégé. Were? She didn't answer that either. It was not my first evening with evasive professionals, but it was an interesting one. Wolfe nodded once, as if he had filed that away for later shredding. Very well. I will consider the matter. Meanwhile, you will answer my questions directly. You brought an invitation. Is it to a private dinner? It is to the Hartswick residence, she said. Tonight. At 9. Wolfe looked at me. I knew that look. It meant I was going somewhere. To commemorate what? He asked. To commemorate his announcement, she said. The trustees were to be informed after a small gathering. Only 5 guests, his inner circle. Who were these guests? She hesitated. A stumble, finally. Then she said, Conrad Lyle, Maris Hale, Dr. Gil Reddick, and Victor Sloan. The names hung there like a row of chess pieces. I recognized two. Conrad Lyle was an investment operator with the kind of reputation that makes people lower their voices. Victor Sloan. I knew from the arts pages, a museum director who had a talent for landing money and stepping on toes politely. I looked at Wolfe. He looked at the ceiling for a half-second, the way he does when he's counting to keep from saying something rude. 5 guests, he murmured, and the host disappears after dessert. Yes. Were you present? No, I was in charge of the Foundation's exhibit table. I left at 9:10. I learned he was missing at 10:30. Wolfe folded his hands again. Were any of these 4 guests present at the Botanic Gardens last night? All of them. Ah. Wolfe's eyes softened with that dangerous satisfaction he gets when a problem begins arranging itself. Then we have a circle, do we not? Celeste Varin watched him. Mr. Wolfe, I need you to find him before morning. The trustees will not hold off the police longer than that. You cannot dictate my pace. I'm not. I'm warning you of the clock you will be working against. Wolfe's mouth twitched. Mr. Goodwin, get your hat. I stood. Just one question before I go chasing the philanthropic elite. What are you not telling us, Miss Varin? She looked at me like I'd just asked for her social security number. Then she said, Mr. Hartswick did not disappear into a vacuum. He disappeared into a plan. I don't know whose plan. That's still not an answer. It's the only one I have. Wolfe's voice was dry. You will remain available. Mr. Goodwin will go to the Hartswick residence at 9. I will make certain telephone calls. If your patron is alive, we will find him. If he is dead, we will find the reason his death was arranged to insult me. Celeste Varin stood, collected her folder, and faced Wolfe squarely. If you need me, you call. I will not be hard to find tonight. And if I do not need you? She gave him a calm smile that didn't reach her eyes. You will. Good night, Mr. Wolfe. She left without another word. I shut the door behind her and turned to Wolfe. Well, I said, either we've got a missing benefactor, or we've been drafted into a boardroom war with orchids as the entry fee. Wolfe grunted. The one does not exclude the other. You really did talk to him alone last night. He didn't look at me. Indeed. And he expected to vanish. Apparently. Did he say why? Wolfe's eyes met mine at last. In them was that faint glimmer he gets when he's both irritated and interested, which is the only time he's really alive. He said, Wolfe told me, that he intended to serve a dessert that would not agree with everyone's digestion. I blinked. That sounds like a metaphor. It was. Wolfe settled deeper into his chair, and it was accompanied by a request that made you take the case. He did not deny it. He said, Archie, go to the Hartswick house. Observe, listen, particularly to what is not said. You will meet 4 people there who have each recently been invited to a feast. Find out which of them has decided the host should not survive it. Got it. And Archie? Yeah. His voice turned heavier. Take care not to accept any dessert. I grinned. No problem. I never trust a cake that comes with a foundation. I got my coat and hat, and as I went out into the hall, the scent of roast beef and Fritz's offended patience floated after me. I had a feeling that by the time I got back, the brownstone would smell less like dinner and more like strategy, suspicion, and somebody's idea of intellectual justice. And in Wolfe's world, that's when the real meal starts. By 8:25, I was on my way uptown with the Hartswick invitation folded in my inside pocket like a passport to trouble. Wolfe's "observe particularly to what is not said" was still ringing in my ear, which is one of the ways he keeps me honest. He gives an order that sounds poetic but means, don't come back with fluff. The Hartswick place was on East 73rd, a townhouse that didn't show off because people with that much money have nothing to prove except that they can afford not to. The doorman knew my name before I said it, which told me Celeste had called ahead or Luther had left a list the way he left the orchid charm. I gave the coat to a butler whose face had been trained to forget what his ears collected, and I was shown into a drawing room that smelled of old books and new polish. 4 people were already there. The clock on the mantel said 8:47. Either they were punctual or nervous. In those circles, punctuality is a form of nervousness. Conrad Lyle was the first I pegged. He had the kind of smoothness that comes from being oiled by banks and lawyers, a neat gray suit, dark hair combed as if it had signed an agreement. He was built like a runner who'd retired young, and he wore a smile that cost money. When I entered, he glanced up, registered me as a stranger, and returned to a drink that was probably older than my cynicism. Maris Hale stood by the fireplace with her back straight, a tall woman in black with silver at her temples, and a necklace that might have been a family heirloom or a debt. She looked like an opera patron who'd learned what it costs to clap at the right time. She watched the room the way a person watches a contract for hidden clauses. Dr. Gil Reddick was seated on a sofa, crossing and uncrossing an ankle over a knee with the crispness of a man who does not lose control of anything except perhaps his temper. He had wireframes, a physician's neat hands, and the kind of skin that had seen too many late nights in fluorescent light. When I came in, he nodded once like he'd already diagnosed me. Victor Sloane was the only one who moved toward me. He was a handsome fellow with a broad-brushed charm, hair a shade too perfect, eyes that said he lived in rooms where art and ego both got hung. He gave me a hand. "Archie Goodwin," he said. "Nero Wolfe's right arm. I was wondering when you'd appear." "Glad to fulfill expectations," I told him. "I'm here for dinner." "We're all here for dinner," Maris Hale said. Her voice had that cool edge that makes a word like dinner sound like a tribunal. "But our host has a record of unpredictability." "Which is a nice way of saying he disappears after dessert," I said. That landed. Not like a bomb, more like a coin dropped in a quiet church. Reddick's foot froze halfway through its cross. Lyle's glass paused just shy of his lips. Sloane's smile tightened for a second too long before he smoothed it back on. "We were told there was a delay," Lyle said at last. His voice was warm, the way a radiator is warm, right before it leaks. "Mr. Hartswick is not a man who can be rushed." "Who told you?" I asked. "A staff call," Hale said. "From Miss Varin." "Ah." So Celeste had been here already and arranged a holding pattern. That meant she was trying to keep them in this room together, under the house's roof, while she waited for Wolfe. That also meant she didn't trust any of them to wander. "Miss Varin is very efficient," Sloane murmured. "Sometimes I think the foundation is her foundation." Reddick looked up sharply. "That is nonsense." "It was only an observation," Sloane said. "Forgive me if I hit a nerve." Reddick's mouth went thin. "You like to talk about nerves. It makes you sound knowledgeable." "Gentlemen," Hale said, "we are not here to squabble. We're here because Luther asked us." "Last night he asked us," I said. "And last night he walked off after dessert and stopped existing. If that seems like a squabble starter, I'll take the blame." Lyle set his drink down carefully. "Mr. Goodwin, I assume you are here on Nero Wolfe's behalf." "On behalf of supper and curiosity," I said. "But yes, Wolfe is interested." "Interested is the wrong word," Hale said. "He is missing." "Interested people find missing people," I told her. "Worried people wait for the police." The air shifted. Hale didn't like being put into a category. She said, "The police are already aware." "Since when?" "Since this afternoon." Reddick spoke fast, like he wanted credit for being ahead of the curve. "Celeste delayed making it public, but there is a limit. They will formalize the search tonight." "So this little dinner party is either a memorial rehearsal or a trap," I said. Sloane raised a brow. "For whom?" "That depends," I said. letting my eyes drift around the room. Who had the most to gain from Luther Hartswick not showing up this morning to rearrange his foundation? Nobody answered, but I got 3 different kinds of silence, which is often better. Lyle's silence was practiced. He lowered his gaze, as if counting the cost of speaking. That's a man who knows what he wants to say, but doesn't know who's listening. Hale's silence was contemptuous. She stared at the fire, not at me, the way a person does when someone has asked a vulgar question. That's a woman who thinks truth is a private property. Reddick's silence was jittery. He tapped a finger once on his knee and then stopped when he saw me watching. That's a man who wants to explain before he's accused. Sloane's silence was theatrical. He let it linger, making sure we all felt it, and then he smiled as if we were in a gallery waiting for the curator to start. That's a man who likes an audience. A butler entered quietly. "Mr. Goodwin, Miss Varyn is asking for you in the library." I nodded and stood. "Don't eat anything I'm not here to taste first," I told them. Our host had ideas about dessert. As I followed the butler out, I could feel their eyes on my back. Behind me, 4 people stayed in a room because Celeste had told them to, and because they each had their own reason not to be the first one wandering the house when the man who owned it had vanished into thin air. The library was a room that had been designed to make people whisper even if they didn't plan to. Dark shelves, leather chairs that had seen more decisions than naps, a desk so large it looked like it might have come with voting rights. Celeste Varyn stood near the desk with her coat draped over one arm, as if she had never intended to stay long. She looked up when I came in, and for the first time since she'd breezed into the brownstone, I saw strain around her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I needed to speak to you alone." "Let me guess," I said. "They want to know if there's dessert. They want to know if there's a living Luther Hartswick." Her voice was clipped, but it had a tremor running under it like a wire. "What have you seen?" 4 suspects behaving like 4 suspects. I leaned against a bookcase. You've got Lyle pretending he's relaxed, Hale pretending she's above the question, Reddick pretending he doesn't care, and Sloane pretending he's in a play. Which of them should I worry about first? "All of them," she said quickly. "Especially tonight." "Why tonight?" She hesitated. It was not a long pause, but it was long enough to be a decision. Then she opened the folder she'd brought, took out a single sheet of paper and held it so I could read a paragraph without getting my fingerprints involved. It was typed on Hartswick stationery, 2 short pages, dated yesterday, addressed to the trustees. I caught the key sentences. The creation of a new controlling endowment, the appointment of Celeste Varyn as interim chair pending a vote, and a clause that removed 2 trustees immediately for cause. The names were redacted on her copy, but not carefully enough. I could make out a C. Lyle and a M. Hale under the black marker like ghosts under snow. I whistled softly, so dessert was going to sit heavy. "He meant to do it tonight after this gathering," she said. "He told me he wanted to look them in the eyes first. He said there were things he needed to confirm." "Confirm what?" "That they would react as he predicted." She shut the folder, a sharp motion. Luther believed people reveal themselves best when they think they've won. "Okay," I said. So he lines up the 4 most important pieces on his board, serves them cake, and then disappears before he can say checkmate. Either he didn't get the chance, or someone beat him to it. Her jaw tightened. He wouldn't have run. Maybe he didn't run. Maybe he was carried. No. She said it like a refusal to consider oxygen optional. Luther planned this weekend. He was not afraid. And he did not trust the police. That's why you're here. Wolfe's here by proxy. I tapped my breast pocket where the invitation still sat. He's making calls. I'm collecting impressions. Then collect this one. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. At 8:45 this morning, a package was delivered here. No sender. The staff brought it to me because it was marked for Luther and he wasn't home. Inside was a dessert fork. I stared. A fork. Silver. Hartswick monogram. His personal set. The one used last night at the gardens. She watched my face. Wrapped in a napkin, there was a smear on the tines. What kind of smear? Dark. She swallowed. I sent it to a lab I trust. Not the police. Not yet. The result isn't back. Celeste, I said, because that was the first time I'd used her first name and I wanted to see how it landed. Why didn't you tell Wolfe this earlier? She didn't flinch at the name. Because I needed to be sure you were actually Wolfe's man, not a reporter or a trustee's spy. Fair. I let it sit a second. A fork sent back like a calling card is either a threat, a joke, or a signal between conspirators. Did Luther have enemies outside the Foundation? Plenty. But last night's dinner, last night's disappearance, has to be inside this circle. It's too timed. Good, I said. Timed crimes usually leave timed mistakes. Her eyes sharpened. There's more. At 9:30 last night, after the gardens had emptied, someone entered Luther's private greenhouse here. The alarm recorded a code, not forced entry. Whose code? Luther's. Her voice went flat. The security company showed me. The code was used once and only once last night. And the cameras? They were off for maintenance, supposedly scheduled by Luther himself. I let out a low breath. So somebody had his code, his schedule, and an excuse for cameras to nap. That narrows it down to people who knew him well enough to imitate him, or who had access to him close enough to steal it. She finished for me. Yes. What was taken from the greenhouse? Nothing obvious. She rubbed her forehead, a quick, frustrated motion. But one shelf had been cleared, a tray of orchids Luther had been preparing for a private gift. Private gift to whom? She looked at me. The strain in her eyes got worse. To you. To Wolfe. That was the plan. He wanted to leave them at your brownstone this morning. A peace offering, I suppose. Or a provocation. Either way, they're gone. I thought about Wolfe's face when he'd seen the gold charm. About the way he'd come into the hall without being called. That matters to him, I said. I know. Her voice softened for a second. That's why I'm telling you. Okay, I said. Let's do the arithmetic. Luther disappears after dessert. His fork returns here with a smear. His greenhouse gets visited with his code and no cameras. The orchids meant for Wolfe vanish. If someone is taunting him, they picked his nerve endings. Yes. Which means, I said slowly, either they're trying to pull Wolfe in deeper, or they're trying to shove him out. Her eyes widened just a touch. Why shove him out? Because Luther wanted Wolfe. If you were planning to make Luther vanish clean, you'd want to make sure Wolfe never got into it. You'd keep his orchids safe, not steal them. Stealing them says you want Wolfe angry. She held my gaze. So you think this is aimed at him? Partly. I started toward the door. But right now, I'm more interested in who among those four knew about a private orchid gift to Wolfe, about maintenance on cameras, about Luther's personal code, and about a dessert fork being the right piece of theater. I paused. One more thing. Who else had keys to the garden's conservatory corridor last night? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, it was barely above a whisper. Me, and Luther. Only you two. Only us. That little fact slid into place with a click I could feel behind my ribs. I nodded once and opened the door. Celeste, I said over my shoulder, you just became more than a worried executive director. Her face went pale, but not surprised, like she'd been waiting to hear it. I know, she said quietly. That's why I called Wolfe. I went back to the drawing room with Celeste's folder in my head and that last whisper in my ear. Only you two. That kind of fact doesn't just sit there. It starts waving flags. The four were still arranged like a gallery exhibit titled People Who Don't Like to Wait. Lyle had migrated to the window, phone in hand, but not using it, as if reception was a moral test. Hale was seated now, hands folded over a knee, chin high. Reddick had moved to the drinks tray and was fussing with a decanter he didn't need. Sloane was perched on the arm of a chair in the limber, overconfident way of a man who expects applause at some point. They all turned when I came in. I gave them a smile that should have been comforting, but wasn't. "Miss Varon says our host is detained," I said. "She asked me to keep you company while she handles logistics. So let's talk about dessert." Hale's eyes narrowed. "What on earth?" "Last night at the Gardens. The dessert course. Mr. Hartswick resisted custom and served something special for his table. You remember?" I let my gaze travel. "What did he serve?" Reddick answered too fast. "Pear tartlets with a spice cream." Sloane chuckled. "You say that like it hurt you, Doctor." "It was fine," Reddick snapped, then caught himself. "A little strong." "Strong how?" I asked. "Clove," Lyle said from the window. "Too much clove." He said it like an investment summary. Factual, tidy, no emotion. That was interesting because clove is not a flavor you invent out of thin air. If he remembered it that clearly, he'd been paying attention. "And who suggested clove?" I asked. Sloane's eyebrows went up. "Suggested? We were guests at a fundraiser, Archie. We don't design menus. Luther did when he felt like it." I took a step toward Reddick. He was proud of the dessert. He mentioned a private recipe. "Did any of you discuss it with him?" Hale's tone sharpened. "Where are you going with this, Mr. Goodwin?" "Where the facts lead." I moved on, before she could fence. "Did any of you leave the table around the time he went missing?" "No," Lyle said. Hale gave a thin smile. "What a question." Reddick said, "I went to the men's room, around 9. Before or after Luther rose at 8:53? Reddick blinked. "After." I think after." Sloane said lightly. "I stepped out to take a call, not in the corridor, in the lobby." "Whose call?" "An artist in Los Angeles who doesn't respect time zones. I can show you my phone if you'd like." I didn't take him up on it. Theatrical silence, remember. A man who offers evidence too eagerly is often offering it for a reason. "And you, Mrs. Hale?" Her lips tightened. I did not leave my seat. "And you, Mr. Lyle?" I was on my feet several times. I circulate, that's what I do. But I didn't escort Luther anywhere. "Did anyone else escort him?" I asked, watching all four. Sloane shook his head. Hale looked away. Lyle's jaw worked once. Reddick opened his mouth and shut it. "Doctor," I said. He gave me a look like I had just poked a bruise. He asked me a question in the corridor. Just a question. I didn't escort him. He stopped me when I came out of the coat room. "What question?" Reddick hesitated. About his lungs." That landed with a soft thud. Hartswick was in his 70s. Lungs could mean age, could mean illness, could mean clinics, could mean blackmail. I filed it. "About his lungs," I repeated. "Medical. Private." He wanted to know if I thought his coughing lately was serious. Reddick's voice was stiff. I told him to see a specialist. "You know him well enough for him to pull you aside for medical advice?" "I'm on the Foundation's health advisory board. He trusted me." Hale's voice curled. "He trusted you because you liked being needed." Reddick shot her a glare. "And he trusted you because you liked owning him." Sloane said softly, "Careful. We're all on edge." "Edge is fine," I said. "Spilling is better." Hale stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Luther may have had a spell. He may have walked out to avoid this very gathering. He was not a hostage to any of us. But he was about to fire 2 trustees, I said. Silence. Real silence. the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. Hale stared at me. Who told you that? Luther, I lied smoothly. Before he vanished, or he was in a reflective mood. Lyle's face didn't change, but his knuckles whitened around his phone. Reddick's eyes widened, then darted to Lyle, then to Hale. Sloane's smile actually faltered. 2 trustees, Sloane murmured. That's dramatic, even for Luther. He loved drama, Hale said, but her voice had lost its cool. Who were they? I'm not here to distribute spoilers, I said. I'm here to find out who knew about it. Lyle cleared his throat. If that was his intention, it concerned the trustees, not us. You are trustees, I said. He blinked once. Excuse me. Conrad Lyle, trustee. Maris Hale, trustee. Gil Reddick, trustee. I let my eyes slide to Sloane. And Victor Sloane, not a trustee, yet. Luther was planning to make you one tonight, wasn't he? Sloane's expression froze for half a second. Then he laughed. You do your homework, too? I learned from the best. I nodded toward the corridor. So 3 trustees and 1 candidate, all in the inner circle, all summoned for a private dinner the night after Luther disappears. That makes this room an echo of last night's table. Same people. Same host missing. Different setting. Reddick swallowed. Are you implying one of us did something to him? I'm implying one of you knows more than you're saying. I turned to Hale. You were going to be removed. How did you take that news? Her eyes flared. I did not know I was going to be removed. Sure. I turned to Lyle. Same question. Lyle's voice was even. I knew Luther was considering changes. He was always considering changes. And you, Doctor, Reddick said. I knew nothing. And you, I said to Sloane, did you know you were about to be crowned? He gave me a small, careful shrug. Luther hinted. Luther always hinted. Okay, I said. Then let me rephrase it. Did Luther tell any of you last night what he was going to announce this morning? Again, 3 silences and 1 noise. The noise was Lyle's phone vibrating in his hand. He looked down at it like it had turned into a snake. Problem? I asked. He pocketed it too quickly. Nothing. Funny, I said. Phones usually disagree. At that moment, the butler reappeared, pale enough to make his uniform look darker. Mr. Goodwin, he said, voice low. There is a call for you. Mr. Wolfe. I felt the room tighten behind me as I followed him out. Whatever was on the other end of that line was about to tilt the whole evening, and judging by Lyle's phantom phone call, somebody in that drawing room already knew it. The call was in a little ante-room off the hall, one of those polite spaces that exist so rich people can have private crises without wrinkling the upholstery. The butler handed me a phone as if it were a holy relic. I took it, shut the door, and said, Yeah? Wolfe's voice came through warm and heavy, the way his voice sounds when he has decided gravity is his ally. Archie, you have spoken to Miss Varin? Just did. She unloaded a few extra courses. Good. I have also had a course served. Inspector Kramer has been notified. He is displeased. When isn't he? This time he has reason. The police have obtained a warrant to search the Hartswick townhouse. They arrived 20 minutes ago. They will be at the door momentarily. I blinked. At the door where I'm standing. At your location, yes. Celeste said they were already sniffing around. They are no longer sniffing. They are entering. I have advised Kramer that your presence is authorized by me and by Miss Varin. He will not like it. If he removes you by your collar, do not resist. That's loving advice. Archie. His tone shifted a hair. There is another matter. Saul Panzer has been to the Botanic Gardens. He spoke to security, catering, and a florist who has a weakness for gossip. He has learned that at 8:47 last night, while you and I were still at the Brownstone, Mr. Hartswick received a sealed note at his table. A sealed note. That was a nice tight screw turning into wood I didn't like. From whom? Unknown. The waiter who delivered it was not part of the catering staff. He wore the proper jacket and no one questioned him. Saul believes he was an imposter. Did anybody see what was in the note? Only the effect. Mr. Hartswick read it, folded it, and placed it in his breast pocket. 2 minutes later, he asked Dr. Reddick to speak with him in the corridor. 3 minutes after that, he rose and vanished. I said nothing for a second. I didn't need to. Wolfe had just handed me a timeline with a spine. So Reddick's corridor chat wasn't about lungs, I muttered. It may have been about lungs, Wolfe said, but it was prompted by the note. Which means the note was either a threat, an invitation, or a datum that required medical corroboration. I'm with 4 people who look like they could write threats in fountain pen, I said. Any clue where the note is now? Not yet. If it is still on his person, it is with him. If it has been removed, that removal is significant. Got it. Anything else I should know before the cavalry charges in? Yes. The laboratory report Miss Varin awaits. Saul has expedited it through a contact at Bellevue. The smear on the dessert fork is blood. Human. Type O, negative. I felt my stomach do a small, slow roll. Luther's type. No. His medical file indicates A, positive. So somebody else's blood got mailed to his house on a fork he used at dessert. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. That's not a joke. That's a statement. Precisely. The fork is theater. The blood is a signal. We must determine whose signal and to whom. Maybe to you. I do not have O-negative blood, Wolfe said dryly. Nor do you, Archie. Unless you have been careless. Not that careless. I rubbed my forehead. Okay. Police coming. Note delivered. Reddick summoned. Blood not Luther's. This thing keeps tightening. It will tighten further. Observe your suspects, especially any reaction to the police arrival. People reveal more to a uniform than to a question. Sure. Anything you want me to do specifically? Wolfe paused a beat. Yes. When the police arrive, ask for a list of employees who had access to the greenhouse alarm codes. The use of Hartswick's code interests me. Codes are not stolen. They are shared. Even if the sharer doesn't mean to, I said. Just so. All right. I'll keep my nose down and my ears open. Archie, another detail. At the gardens, the dessert was served with a clove-heavy cream. Saul obtained the recipe. It was not prepared by the caterer. It was delivered in a separate container by a man who signed in as L. Hartswick. I nearly laughed. So Luther or someone pretending to be Luther delivered his own dessert. Exactly. If he did not do so, someone did it for him. That someone had access to his name and confidence sufficient to impersonate him. Keep that in mind. I will. I'm hanging up before this phone becomes evidence. Proceed, Wolfe said, and the line went dead. I slid the receiver back onto its cradle just as a hard knock sounded in the front hall. Not a rich person knock, a city knock. The kind that says there are badges on the other side and they aren't here for tea. When I got back to the drawing room, the butler was already opening the door. Inspector Kramer came in first, a big slab of impatience in a suit that made him look like he'd rather be in a trench coat. 2 uniforms followed, and a young sergeant with a clipboard like he wanted to prove he was literate. Kramer's eyes swept the room, landed on the 4 guests, and then hit me. His mouth tightened. Goodwin, he growled. What are you doing here? Eating dinner, I said. Same as you, maybe, if you keep barging in at course time. Don't get fresh. He waved a hand toward the room. We've got a missing man, possible foul play. This house is now a scene. Hale rose, icicles in her gaze. Inspector, I assure you. Save it, Kramer said. Everybody stays where they are until we're done. And you, he jabbed a finger at me, you don't interfere. I'm not interfering, I said. I'm observing, at Wolfe's request and Miss Varin's. He snorted. Yeah, I talked to Varin. She's skating on thin ice. and Wolfe can request Tilly's blue. I'm running this." "Funny," I said. Wolfe says you're displeased." His glare deepened. The uniforms started to split off toward the hallways. The sergeant began asking the butler questions. The room got busy in that controlled, invasive way cops do when they let the air out of a place. Reddick had gone a shade wider. Lyle stood very still, hands in pockets like he was trying not to show he had any. Hale held her chin up as if she would rather die than be searched. Sloane watched everything with an actor's interest, but his foot was tapping now. Kramer barked an order for someone to secure the greenhouse and the study. When he turned away from me to do it, I caught Lyle's eye. He looked at his pocket, at me, and then away. Small, fast, but it was there. Somebody had called him, or he had called somebody. And whatever message had been on that phantom vibration, it had arrived right before Wolfe's call arrived to me. The night had just started, and already the timing was too pretty to be accidental. Cops have a way of turning a furnished room into a waiting room without moving a chair. 2 uniforms stood by the doors. One began leafing through a guest book on a side table. The sergeant did his clipboard routine with the butler, and Kramer prowled like a bull looking for a china shop that had offended him personally. I took a seat that gave me a clean line on all 4 faces and enough distance to look harmless. Harmless is a working costume for me. I can add teeth later. Kramer halted in front of the fireplace. "All right," he said. "Let's start simple. Last scene time." Hale's voice stayed icy. "At the Botanic Gardens reception, shortly after 9. Kramer's head jerked. "Not what I asked. I asked last seen by any of you." Reddick cleared his throat. "I spoke to him in the corridor outside the hall, about 9 or a few minutes before." 8:50? Kramer snapped. Reddick's mouth opened and closed. "I'm not sure of the exact minute. You're a doctor. You folks live on exact minutes." Reddick flushed. It was after dessert. He stopped me. He asked about his cough, and then he went back in. That's all. Kramer stared at him. "You want me to believe he just wandered off after a fundraiser like he misplaced his hat?" "I want you to believe the truth," Reddick said, a little too loudly. Kramer turned to Lyle. "You." Lyle was still calm, still polished. "I didn't see anything. We were at the table. He rose and didn't return. Nobody thought it odd for a while." "And you didn't go after him?" "No." "Why not?" Lyle shrugged slightly. "Because Luther Hartswick doesn't need a chaperone." "That's not an answer. That's a bumper sticker." Kramer's eyes slid to Sloane. "You." Sloane spread his hands. "Same as Conrad. I assumed he was taking a call or stepping out for air. There were 100 people there, Inspector." "And one of them wasn't a caterer but delivered a note to his table," Kramer growled. "You sure you didn't notice that?" Sloane blinked, genuinely surprised or very good at it. "A note?" Hale's face froze. Lyle's jaw tightened a fraction. Reddick looked the way a man looks when he hears his own name called in a hospital corridor. Kramer saw it too. He looked at Hale. "You knew about the note?" Hale steadied herself with a breath. "I saw a waiter hand him something. I didn't know it was a note." "You didn't mention it when we talked this afternoon. Because you didn't ask about waiters. You asked about Luther." She lifted her chin. "And I don't appreciate being cross-examined in his home." Kramer snorted. "Get used to it. This home is evidence now." He nodded at the sergeant. "Get statements, individually." The sergeant began herding them toward the study. Reddick went first, still protesting in small clipped bursts. Lyle followed, smooth as if he'd done depositions for sport. Hale glided after them on pride alone. Sloane brought up the rear, giving me a quick look that said, "We'll talk later." While they were funneled out, I stood and drifted toward the sergeant. "Inspector wants a list of who had access to the greenhouse alarm codes," I said lightly, as if I was making conversation about cigars. The sergeant glanced at me, then at Kramer, who was busy barking at a uniform in the hall. "We'll get it. Wolfe will want it tonight." That got attention. The sergeant's mouth tightened, but he said, "Staff list is with the house manager. We're pulling it." "Good." I didn't push. A push makes me visible. I wanted to stay a shadow. Kramer came back into the drawing room just as the study door closed behind the last suspect. "You still here, Goodwin?" "Like wallpaper," I said. "Listen, Kramer, that note last night, your people confirmed it existed?" "They confirmed a thing was delivered. They didn't confirm where it came from. Or where it went." He glared. "If you know something, say it." I gave him half a smile. If I knew something, you'd already be mad at me for saying it. He didn't like that, but he didn't slap cuffs on me either. That meant he was in the mood to use me if it suited him. A uniform popped his head in. "Inspector, greenhouse secure. No sign of forced entry. Alarm panel shows owner code used at 9:32, then rearmed at 9:39. Kramer swore. "Get prints off the panel. Check the keypad for smudges." The uniform left. Kramer turned to me. "Owner code, that's Hartswick, unless somebody else had it." "Codes are shared," I said. He narrowed his eyes. "Wolfe tell you that?" "I'm a quick learner." I paused. Who else had access to his codes? House staff. Maybe Varin. Maybe a trustee if he was careless. "Careless isn't Luther Hartswick's favorite hobby," I said. Kramer opened his mouth to bite back, but the sergeant came in, looking like he'd just found the first loose thread on a sweater. "Inspector, we found something in the study wastebasket. Burned paper, not fully." He held out an evidence bag. Kramer snatched it. I leaned in enough to see without looking nosy. Inside were a few curled, blackened scraps. On one, the top half of a word survived, smirked. On another, a neat handwritten 847, and beneath it, maybe an R. Kramer squinted. "Get tech to reconstruct." "Now." The sergeant hurried off. Kramer glowered at the bag as if it had offended him. "Burned note," he said. "Or burned copy of a note," I said. "Meaning somebody read a note and didn't want it read twice." He shot me a look. "Who'd burn it here?" I made a face like I was thinking hard, which is a terrific way to hide that I already was. 4 guests, all in that room, all close enough to slip into a study while everyone was waiting, and one of them had gotten a phone vibration right before the cops arrived. "Could be staff," I said mildly. "Could be a trustee who had time to kill." Kramer grunted. "All right, I'll ask them." "Don't," I said before I could stop myself. He turned slow. "Don't what?" "Don't ask them as a group. You'll get theater. Ask them when they don't know what the others said." He stared at me. Then, grudgingly, "That's what we're doing." "Good." I let the word hang. Because whoever burned that paper did it fast, and they did it thinking only about themselves. From down the hall I heard a voice rise, Reddick's, sharp with indignation, then Lyle's, lower, soothing, then Hale's, cold as a knife on porcelain, the kind of chorus that makes me itch to know which note is false. Kramer started toward the hall. I followed at a legal distance. Whatever Hartswick had read at 8:47 last night had gotten him out of his chair, into a corridor, and out of sight. Now its ashes were sitting in an evidence bag in his own house, and somebody in that house was trying to make sure it stayed ashes. The reconstruction of burned paper takes longer in police time than it does in Wolfe time, because police time includes coffee, arguments, and waiting for the right man to bring the right envelope. I didn't get to see the techs at work. Kramer made sure of that by stationing a uniform between me and the hall like I was a contagious idea. But by 10:30, the house had that exhausted, sour smell it gets when everybody has repeated their story twice and believes it less each time. Celeste pulled me into the library again. "They're going to take them downtown," she said. "Let them," I told her. Wolfe hates traveling, not talking. He'll do his part from the brownstone. Her eyes flicked to the closed doors, then back. You spoke to him? 5 minutes ago. He wants you at our office. Midnight. I watched her flinch, not from fear, but from calculation. Bring whatever copies you've got of Luther's announcement and your own notes, and Celeste, come alone. I always do, she said quietly, which sounded less like a vow than a confession. Kramer emerged from the study with his coat on, looking the way a man looks when he's hungry and the universe is still being uncooperative. We're taking statements downtown, he barked. Varen, you're coming too. Celeste went stiff. Inspector, I'm needed here. You're needed where I say you're needed. I stepped in before her spine snapped. Kramer, Wolfe wants her for an interview at midnight. You know him. If you keep her now, he'll just wake you at 2 with a theory you'll pretend you thought of. Kramer glared at me long enough to age vanilla. Then he said, Midnight, Wolfe's office. I'll be there. She goes nowhere else. Scout's honor, I said. He herded the 4 downtown in separate cars. I watched them go. Lyle calm as a banker entering a meeting. Hale wrapped in dignity like it was armor. Reddick sweating in a way he couldn't bill for. Sloan still trying to angle his profile to the streetlights. When the last tail light vanished, Celeste and I were left in the hollowed-out drawing room with a board uniform and too much silence. Do you have somewhere safe to wait? I asked her. My office is here, she said. Safe isn't the word. Then come with me now. You can sit in Wolfe's office while he sulks about being interrupted. Her mouth tightened. He won't sulk if he has an answer. That's the spirit. On the drive back downtown, I called Saul Panzer. His voice came in crisp. Yes? Any luck on whose blood was on the fork? O negative narrows it. Female, probably. There's only one person in the Hartswick circle with documented O negative. Maris Hale. She donated blood at a foundation drive last spring. Her type is in their records. That hit like a tiny hammer. You sure? Sure enough to bet your hat. I like my hat, I said, and hung up. Celeste sat in the car watching the city go by as if she was memorizing it for court. You ever had your blood typed? I asked casually. She snapped a glance at me. Yes, a positive. Why? No reason, just making conversation to keep myself from thinking about dessert forks. She didn't smile. Back at the brownstone, Fritz met us with a look that said if this case got between Wolfe and his warmed roast again, somebody was going to be poisoned, and Fritz hoped it would be legal. I guided Celeste into the office. Wolfe was already seated behind the desk, hands folded, face calm in that way which means he is boiling hot in a civilized direction. Miss Varen, he said, like he'd summoned her for tea. Good evening, sit down. She sat. I took my chair, notebook open, head full. At 11:55, the doorbell rang. I let Kramer in myself because Wolfe refuses to rise for anything except his orchids. Kramer barged into the office as if he'd paid the mortgage. All right, he said. Be quick. Wolfe regarded him. Inspector, you're never at your best when you are in a hurry. It is one of your endearing limitations. Save the compliments. Wolfe nodded slightly. Very well, we will proceed. Archie, you have filed your observations. Filed and stamped. Good. I shall begin with what is not in doubt. Wolfe's voice moved into that steady, judicial lane he uses when he wants to make facts feel like gravity. At 8:47 last night, Mr. Luther Hartswick received a sealed note delivered by a man impersonating a waiter. At approximately 8:50, he summoned Dr. Gil Reddick to the conservatory corridor for a brief discussion. At 8:53, he rose from the table and vanished. Kramer grunted. We know that. Perhaps. But you do not know why. The note, which was later burned in the Hartswick study, contained a simple proposition. Wolfe looked at Celeste. Miss Varin, the scraps reconstructed by police technicians were relayed to me by an obliging officer. The word fragment, smirt, was part of dessert. The handwritten time 8:47 was the moment of delivery. The initial R was not random. It was intended to direct Mr. Hartswick to Dr. Reddick. Reddick was not present, but I could still hear his indignation in my head. Kramer shifted. "Why would a note point to Reddick?" Kramer demanded. Wolfe lifted a hand. "Patience. Mr. Hartswick was a man who collected leverage as others collect stamps. He had recently become concerned about his health. Dr. Reddick was his advisor. The note said, in effect, 'Your dessert has been altered. Ask Reddick.'" Celeste's breath caught. "Altered how?" "By clove," Wolfe said. An excessive clove cream was served, prepared separately from the caterer's stock. The cream was delivered earlier that evening to the gardens by a man signing in as L. Hartswick. That man was not Mr. Hartswick. He was smaller, masked by a brimmed hat, and moved with the confidence of someone who belonged, because he had belonged in that kitchen before. I leaned forward. "House staff?" "Not house staff," Wolfe said. "A trustee who had overseen foundation galas for years and had the entree to every service corridor. A woman." Celeste's face went rigid. Kramer's eyes narrowed. "Maris Hale," Wolfe said softly. Kramer swore. "What the hell does clove have to do with kidnapping?" Wolfe looked at him as if that was a question a man asked only when he had not read the recipe. "Clove, Inspector, is an irritant. In the quantity served, it would provoke coughing, throat constriction, and panic in an elderly man already worried about his lungs." Mr. Hartswick, upon reading the note, feared he had been poisoned. He summoned Dr. Reddick, whose profession makes him the natural arbiter of such fears, to confirm whether his symptoms were imaginary or lethal. Celeste whispered. So Hale wanted him frightened. Yes, she wanted him away from witnesses. She wanted him to leave the table on his own feet. Kramer said, "But why?" She could have just slipped him something worse. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Because she did not want him dead in public. She wanted him removed from the boardroom before morning without a corpse. She wanted time and control. Celeste stiffened. Removed, so he couldn't announce the restructuring. Precisely. Wolfe tapped the desk once. Mr. Hartswick intended to dismiss 2 trustees for cause, Mrs. Hale and Mr. Lyle. He intended to elevate you, Miss Varin, temporarily. He intended to invite Mr. Sloane to the board. That information was shared only with you, in confidence. Celeste said nothing. Her silence was brittle, not guilty. Wolfe went on. Mrs. Hale learned of her removal yesterday afternoon. Not from you, Miss Varin, but from Mr. Hartswick himself. He sought to confirm something about her. He told her of his intention and watched her reaction. He did this because he was a strategist before he was a philanthropist. I saw Celeste's eyes flicker. She knew it was true. Mrs. Hale left his office with fury. She also left with opportunity. Wolfe's gaze slid to Kramer. She had access to his household routines from years of trustee dinners in that townhouse. She had an old service key to the greenhouse door from her time as gala chair. She had seen him enter that 4-digit alarm code on more than one occasion. She had the means to imitate it. She also had something else. I jumped in. "Oh, negative blood." Wolfe nodded. Yes, the blood on the dessert fork was hers. She did not cut herself by accident. She pricked a finger deliberately, smeared the fork, and sent it to the house in the morning. Why? To create a false trail. To suggest that the dessert had drawn blood, that poison had been real, that violence had already occurred. It was an attempt to steer your investigation, Inspector, into the melodrama of murder rather than the quiet mechanics of abduction. Kramer stared. You're saying she staged evidence before we even knew he was missing? She knew, Wolfe said, because she orchestrated his disappearance. Celeste's voice came out tight. Where is he? Wolfe's eyes went to her. "We are approaching that," he continued without hurry. After the note, Mr. Hartswick met Dr. Reddick in the corridor. The doctor, unaware of the dessert's alteration, reassured him. But reassurance does not soothe a man who has just been told his food is suspect. Mr. Hartswick returned to the table unsettled. He finished his coffee, then he rose at 8:53 to seek air, or perhaps to seek Mrs. Hale. He did not announce his fear aloud because he was proud. He did not call the police because he distrusted them. He did not call you, Miss Varin, because he did not wish to alarm you. Kramer said, "So he walks into a corridor and she jumps him?" Wolfe's mouth made a faint, disgusted line. "Mrs. Hale is not a dockhand. She did not jump him. She met him." I could see it now as Wolfe laid it out, like watching chess pieces move in slow light. Mrs. Hale left the reception table earlier, under the pretext of a coat room visit. She went to the conservatory corridor. She waited where cameras are scarce and foot traffic minimal. When Mr. Hartswick arrived, she told him that his dessert had indeed been tampered with. Not lethally, but symbolically. She was the one who planted the note, delivered by an accomplice. She played on his anxiety to draw him farther, to a service exit. "Accomplice?" Kramer barked. Wolfe looked at him. "Conrad Lyle." I felt Kramer stiffen. Celeste's eyes widened, but not in surprise, more like a muscle remembering pain. Wolfe said, "Mr. Lyle had as much to lose as Mrs. Hale. He is no fool. He did not trust her to carry out a plan alone. He provided the man in the waiter's jacket, a private security contractor on his payroll. He arranged a vehicle to wait in the rear service lane. His telephone vibration in the drawing room this evening was a check-in. He was anxious because the police arrived sooner than he expected." Kramer snapped, "We didn't get any call logs." "You will," Wolfe said. "We are not done." He spread his fingers slightly. Mr. Hartswick went through that service exit under Hale's persuasion, perhaps under the belief he was about to confront a perpetrator or receive proof. Outside, he was met by Lyle's man. There was a brief struggle. Mrs. Hale attempted to assist. In the process, she cut her finger on the fork she had retained in her handbag from the dessert course. That same fork became her theatrical blood letter this morning. Celeste whispered. She kept the fork. "Yes," Wolfe said. "A trophy and a tool. She's sentimental in her cruelty." Kramer growled. "Where'd they take him?" Wolfe leaned back a mite, savoring the last aria. "Here." We all stared. Wolfe said, "At 9:32 last night, the greenhouse alarm at the Hartswick townhouse was disarmed using Mr. Hartswick's code. The cameras were off because Mrs. Hale had arranged maintenance days earlier through a friendly board contact. She and Mr. Lyle brought Mr. Hartswick to the greenhouse, not to kill him, but to hold him in a place he would consider secure and private while they forced a decision." Kramer said, "Forced what decision?" "Resignation," Wolfe said. "Or at minimum delay. Mrs. Hale needed him alive to sign a document retracting the dismissals, to preserve her control of the Foundation's art endowment. Mr. Lyle needed him alive to block the restructure that would have exposed his financial manipulations. Their goals aligned. Their temperaments did not. That is why their plan is clumsy enough to be read." Celeste was white now. "You're saying Luther is in his own greenhouse?" "Or was," Wolfe said. "What do you mean, was?" Her voice cracked. Wolfe's eyes cooled. "Because their alliance frayed. Mr. Hartswick, when confronted, is not easily cowed. He would have resisted. He would perhaps have taunted them. He might even have offered a counter-proposal. If so, it would enrage someone who believes authority is owed to tradition." He turned his head slightly toward me. I knew the cue. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Tell them what you observed about Mrs. Hale's silence." I looked at Celeste, then at Kramer. Back at the Hartswick house, when I mentioned trustees being removed, Hale didn't ask if it was true. She asked who told me, like she already knew enough to care about leakage, not about content. That's a woman who'd already had the talk. Wolfe nodded. "Exactly. She was in a fury from yesterday. Fury leads to impatience. Impatience leads to escalation. Kramer snapped. You think she killed him? I think, Wolfe said, that there was an unplanned injury. The blood on the fork is hers, not his. That suggests that if he bled, it was not on that utensil. Mrs. Hale has arthritis in her right hand. She favors her left. If she struck him, it would be with a heavy object close at hand. Celeste stared at him. What object? Wolfe's voice went almost gentle. The brass watering can. That sits on the second shelf in the greenhouse. It was missing when police searched. I infer this from Miss Varen's earlier report of a cleared shelf, and from the fact that the can is a favorite of Mr. Hartswick's, often polished and in view. Kramer cursed again and was halfway to the door before Wolfe finished. Inspector, Wolfe said, you will find Mr. Hartswick alive. Kramer whirled. You just said. I said there was an unplanned injury, Wolfe replied. Not a fatal one. Mrs. Hale is not a murderer by nature. She's a custodian of power. She would not risk turning her negotiations into a corpse. She struck him, perhaps, but not with lethal intent. Mr. Lyle, being practical, would have insisted on medical care. Dr. Reddick's skills were therefore required. Celeste inhaled sharply. Reddick. Yes, Wolfe said. Dr. Reddick knew more tonight than he admitted. Not because he orchestrated anything, but because he was recruited after the fact. A doctor called to a greenhouse at midnight by trustees in panic is not likely to refuse. He's also unlikely to confess to you thereafter because he fears losing his license and his standing. He was the one who cleaned the wound. He was the one who advised moving Mr. Hartswick somewhere safer before police arrived. Somewhere safer than his own house, Celeste said. Wolfe's eyes were hard now. Safer from you, Miss Varen, because you are the variable they underestimated. They did not anticipate that you would call me within the hour. They did not anticipate that I would take offense at the theft of orchids intended for me. They did not anticipate that Mr. Goodwin would be in that drawing room watching their faces while the police searched. Kramer was already out the door, barking into his phone for units to return to the townhouse and focus on the greenhouse and basement access. Celeste stood there as if she'd forgotten her joints. If Luther is alive, he is, Wolfe said. And when he is recovered, he will ratify his decisions with added relish. People who attempt to dethrone him tend to fortify his taste for sovereignty. She looked like she might cry, but she didn't. That impressed me in a complicated way. At 1:15, the phone rang. I answered. Kramer's voice came through thick with adrenaline and triumph. We found him. Greenhouse basement. Tied up but alive. Head wound, concussion, nothing worse. Reddick was there. Lyle and Hale were on their way back when we rolled in. We got them in cuffs. I looked at Wolfe. He was already reaching for his napkin, which told you everything about his emotional range. I covered the receiver. He's alive. Misdemeanor head wound. Everybody else in bracelets. Wolfe closed his eyes a moment like a man savoring a sip. Good. Celeste sagged into the chair. The relief on her face was raw and human and made her look suddenly younger. Kramer finished with a growl. You are right, damn you. I'm putting it in my report that Wolfe inferred a missing watering can and a stubborn ego. You can spell ego however you like, Inspector. Wolfe's tone was mild. But do not misspell my name. Kramer hung up on him. I grinned at the dead line. The house settled into quiet. Fritz drifted in to see if the world was done interrupting dinner. Wolfe gave him a nod that meant yes, bring the coffee, and maybe a slice of something that wasn't clove. Celeste rose. Mr. Wolfe, thank you. You are welcome, Wolfe said. But remember this. Philanthropy is a public mask on private appetites. Mr. Hartswick understands that. It is why he is dangerous to those who depend upon the mask. She swallowed. What will he do now? What he intended, only faster. Wolfe made a small, satisfied sound, and perhaps with less patience for sentiment. She hesitated at the door. He wanted to give you orchids. Wolfe's eyes glinted. He still may. If he does, I shall accept them with thanks and with the caution appropriate to a man who prefers his desserts unmeddled with. After she left, Fritz served the reheated roast as if time itself had been kneaded back into shape. Wolfe ate in silence for a while, the room returning to its proper rhythm. When he was halfway through, he said, without looking up, "Archie." "Yeah." Mr. Hartswick was correct in one respect. That he can make enemies at dessert. "No." Wolfe dabbed his mouth. "That I do not tolerate a puzzle that invades my household. But more precisely, he was correct that the appetite for power is a vulgar substitute for the appetite for excellence. I'll put that on a plaque," I said. "Do not." I watched him pour coffee, calm as if no man had vanished after dessert and been found in a greenhouse basement. That's Wolfe, unmoved in body, tyrannical in mind, and always slightly offended that human beings insist on turning simple dinners into complicated crimes. Me, I was just glad the cake hadn't come home with us.